Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on all matters property, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. Live every Sunday at 10 a.m, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn and our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you're watching on our website, leave us a Google review, and if you want to get involved in the conversation, just leave your comments in the comments section underneath wherever you're watching us today. Any topics you'd like us to discuss, and we have got some discussion programmes coming up shortly, hello at propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you don't have the time to watch us in full, of course, you can take us on the move as a podcast, an audio version of it. Of course, that's out every Monday at 10 a.m. Just search Property Matters wherever you get your podcasts from. Also, the show is broadcast across the week on Dilsey Radio. So let's take a look at this week's property news with our property expert, Joe Joshi. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Paul. Good morning, and good morning to our viewers and listeners, wherever you are. Plenty to talk about in Property Matters.
Indeed, and we're starting off today with renters facing a desperate situation as tax system deters buy-to-let landlords. There's nothing new in this, and we've discussed this plenty of times, but I wanted to get to one fact that they've brought out from this particular piece of study that they've done here. So let's just head straight into it, I guess. The proportion of private landlords who report increased demand for rental properties has more than tripled compared with demand for properties seen pre-COVID pandemic. This is according to independent research from the NRLA, that's the National Residential Landlords Association. A study conducted by the research consultancy BVA BDRC found that 71% of landlords reported increased tenant demand in the quarter three of this year, a record high. It's up from 65% at the same time last year and up 22% on quarter three in 2019 before COVID. The survey also revealed that demand for renters is strongest in the West Midlands at 76% of landlords reporting an increased tenant situation. And despite record demands, 12% of landlords surveyed said that they sold a property in quarter three. This is more than double the 5% of landlords who were confirming that they had purchased property in the same period. Similarly, 28% of respondents said they plan to cut the number of properties they rent out over the next 12 months. This contrasts with the 8% of landlords who plan to increase the number that they let over the coming year. It does seem rather extraordinary, isn't it, that the government has managed to make it such an unprofitable business for landlords, and yet this is at a time when there's record numbers of potential customers, tenants.
Yes, I mean, it's really quite a bit of a saga if you think about it, that, the demand for rental property is probably the highest for some time. And especially during the year when you find that the interest rates have gone up so much that the buying opportunities have been just further and further away from first-time buyers or perhaps even investors. So the rental market is really strong, but the government have somehow managed to really scupper landlords who are desperate to get out because of taxation and because of even things like, purchase costs, stamp duty, etc. All of those things are just not helping buyers wanting to invest into the letting market. And of course, the demand for letting is the highest. So, and of course, the government isn't building enough houses for the rental market or for social housing. So whichever way you look at it, they've managed to snooker themselves by doing some of the silliest things possible. When it's the old adage you'll hear, I suppose, why fix something that's not broke? But the problem is, I suppose they wanted to break it in order to stop the prices shooting up as they were. But whatever happens, I mean, we've learned and we've discussed on our programs that over the last 50 years, prices have really gone into reverse probably about 4 or 5 times in real essence. They're always going to go up. The demand is always there. And of course, the supply has normally been limited. But the supply is there now. It's just that, all of the interest, all the things that make people want to invest in property, be it value, be it capital return, be it investment, against how much their mortgage might be against what they could rent it out for. All of that has sort of fallen by the wayside. And of course, the government didn't do anything in the last autumn statement, which I was expecting them to do something. And maybe they're thinking that they'll do something in the spring statement. But I just think that they've left it a little bit too late in terms of rekindling the market for those landlords who are not in droves exiting, but the ones that just simply can't afford to keep it in, where the rental buy-to-let mortgages have become so expensive that they just need to get out. And unfortunately, they're also in a difficult situation there because some of them are rented out at perhaps lower yields, and that doesn't make it easy for them to sell either, because the next investor isn't getting a return on their investment. So we are in a bit of a crossroads at the moment.
It is a bit of a no-win situation, isn't it, really, Joe? I mean, if you think about it, you have to put the interest rates up to curb people's spending to control inflation. But of course, as a result of that, the landlords then can't afford to buy the properties to rent out to people. And then, of course, they trade those properties in. There's vast numbers of people who probably maybe have been in a house and then realise that they're not going to be able to afford to keep up the mortgage repayments. So they're selling the property and going into rented. That means even more people looking for rental stock, and yet the stock is dwindling, and yet the demand is going up. So by controlling inflation in one place and controlling the costs in one place, they've made rent rise through the roof.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is a bit of a farce, in all honesty, at this moment in time. I've got landlords coming in and saying they need higher rents. Got tenants saying they simply can't afford higher rents, and landlords are at a point where they've got properties sitting there, can't risk renting them out at the lower prices, knowing full well that they've actually got mortgage payments which are exceeding the potential rent. And of course, there's always that danger of renting to someone who says they can't afford it, but once they're in, there's that danger that they turn around and say they no longer can afford it. But of course, by then they are in the property, and that is just completely a different challenge. So we are at a very, very precarious location in terms of what is the right thing to do as far as the rental is concerned. And certainly, landlords that are looking to rent are finding it hard to fund it. And so, yes, the new norm, which is about 5.5, 5.25% plus maybe a couple of percent, is the buy-to-let market. And so you've got to calculate what your new rental is going to be based on that payment. And if you take that payment into consideration, I mean, the average house is now creeping up to, a three-bedroom semi-detached in some areas is nearly 2,500, between £2,500 a month. That's before they start paying their commitments, their rates, the rent, the electric, the gas, and all the other sort of things. So, and food on the table. So it is a bit challenging, but potentially they could consider a rate discount. I can't see that happening at the moment because of the way things are. They could potentially consider cutting stamp duty. Well, that window of opportunity is now gone till till spring next year. They're not going to do that. I think it's just the case of balancing out what is that we can do at the moment.
It is rather crazy that we've got a tax system that makes it actually more beneficial for landlords to turn those rental properties into holiday lets rather than the long-term homes to rent which people want. I mean, that just doesn't seem to add up, does it?
Yeah, I mean, holiday lets are short-term lets, of course, but they're not always. I mean, Britain is not the sunniest place in the world, and it's not one that's going to have lots of holiday lets. It has a seasonal time for certain things throughout the year, and some of those could work, but there's still void periods in that holiday let that could come in, and when that void period comes in, it doesn't matter whether the taxation makes it viable. It negates the whole thing because the void period is going to also be costly. So if you're not renting it out for, let's say, a month, well, that's your month's money, going down the pan. And at the same time, maybe you might have saved that in a tax, but you just paid it out by not earning it in the first place. So really difficult situation, and it's not as easy as people think on short-term lets either. There are extra expenditures that are involved. I mean, I've spoken to a few people that do Airbnb, and whilst if they're on it full time, they could probably make a good return. But if they're not, then by the time they've actually costed the turnaround period, so let's say in a week you've had 3 people that turned up and rested, you've turned that property around 3 times with the cleaner, the sheets, all that kind of stuff, and someone to go around and do it and pay them, and then in all honesty, have you really actually got a good return? And the answer probably is that all you're doing is washing its face and keeping somebody in employment. So there's a lot of questions in that, I mean, if you're doing it permanently, full time, and it's just what you do and you do it yourself, then yes, there's probably a good return in it.
This is the figure I was getting to actually when I was referring to at the very beginning. Research by Capital Economics for the NRLA said that removing the 3% stamp duty levy on the purchase of additional homes would see almost 900,000 new private rented homes made available across the UK over the next 10 years. As a result of increases in income and corporation tax receipts, the modelling also suggests that this would lead to a 10 billion boost to Treasury revenue over the same period. So getting rid of that stamp duty levy, which of course they've put on to anyone who's got a buy-to-let property, essentially an additional home if you like, that's going to put 90,000 homes back on the market per year. Now, the government have said they've done something like 260,000 this year of new builds. So, I mean, I know that's not new builds, but at least they'd have put another 90,000 available homes onto that annual achievement just by taking that 3% stamp duty away. And of course, the other point is that because of the income tax receipts and the corporation tax receipts, they'll get 10 billion from another avenue.
Yes, I mean, again, we are playing with the numbers, but yes, the 3% stamp duty on a buy-to-let home does and has killed that market. I mean, people were doing buy-to-let flats and houses and all sorts of things, and at a sliding scale, they had no objection in paying, the value of the stamp duty on it. But given that it's just a fixed 3%, come what may, on a second home, does kill the deal for over that period. Now, if you have a mortgage over 15, 20 years, then even if you spread the cost of that stamp duty over the same period as the mortgage period, it's just another exit that has to, another cost that has to be paid. But the problem is it's paid upfront in a lump sum, and that's what really tends to kill it for most people, because they could use that money perhaps to do a property up and refurbish it and get it out on the market, as opposed to just lining the treasury's pockets with stamp duty money. So yeah, there are many things that have gone wrong, in my opinion, and obviously in most people's opinion, in terms of the property market when things were going fairly well. But I've always said that they've used the property market as a yo-yo. All political colours have used the property market as yo-yos. When it suits them, they will make the appropriate adjustment, because they know that at the end of the day, the people in the UK want to own and buy a property, want to buy that as an investment. It's one of their first loves that they have. And so sooner or later, they'll forget and move on again. But unfortunately, in the short term, it does create a lot of problems.
Let's move on to our second story today. This is looking ahead to 2024. What can we predict about the housing market for next year? Estate agents have been told there are signs of positivity in the market for next year, but what are the variables, the tricky unknowns, which will dictate which way the market really goes? With the twists and turns of the current political economy, it's difficult to basically work out what's going to happen and how it's going to shape up. Recently, Savills Research issued its forecasts that the market was past peak pain, with projections of UK house prices falling just 3% in next year. Markets operate in cycles, they say, and I think next year will be the case of the agents holding on. Whenever you have the period of a softer market condition and a scramble for market share and more saleable stock, there is always a risk that you price high and try to work the price down over the period. Remember that your track record is determined by what you sell and your sales record, not necessarily by the amount of stock you have on the market. So there are two big variables, of course, next year: mortgage costs and a general election. And it's going to be interesting to see how they affect how next year shapes up, Joe.
Yes, I mean, it's the old story of Mystic Meg and the crystal ball, I suppose. What happens next year? I mean, we are, on that sort of time at the end of the year now, and we're all sort of making predictions towards what 24 would do. I think that the market is stable, but it will stay low turnover, quiet, primarily because there are so many uncertainties. Of course, the first thing and foremost is going to be that there is an election in 2024, and that means that we don't know which way it's going to turn, and it very much is that. and whoever takes over, whether it's blues or reds, then they've got a 5-year, 4-year, 5-year plan to start to see what they can do. But right now, we're all treading on eggshells, not knowing who's going to be in and what policies and what plans that they bring in into the marketplace to get it sort of rejuvenated. So the confidence is a little bit low. Interest rates having gone up throughout this year has definitely put a stop on the marketplace. People are finding it hard to find the money to actually continue either get the deposits or even match or meet the criteria of the banks that are looking to lend to them. So those two things are probably at the highest level. Of course, the wish and the want of all people has not gone away. They still want to buy and they still want to have the opportunity to invest. So therefore, the rental market at the moment is strong. But of course, we're in a chicken and egg situation there where the rental demand is high, but the supply of rental property has become low because it's impossible to fund those at the levels that they are. I mean, it will obviously sort itself out as it always has done historically over the next couple of years, but it'll certainly be a rocky 24 in my opinion.
Samuel seems to think there will be a interest rate cut next year, albeit a small one, and that will accelerate growth into 2025. But of course, they warn that if there isn't one in 24, then 25 is going to be sluggish as well as 24. It doesn't bode well if we don't get some kind of cut next year.
To be perfectly honest with you, I can't see them going back. What they might do is do some fixed rates, and that's the way they will show their cut. But from 5.25%, let's say to 5%, it's a possibility. I've always said 5% was the marker, and it might be that they'll take it to 5%, and that might be enough to rejuvenate the interest. But it's 2025 probably where you might start to see, because whoever comes in next year will then start to settle the market, and I think we'll see the real change happening in 2025. 2024, I think, will be just hold your nerve, as I would say, and you just get through it, really.
Well, they're talking about the gradual restoration of a buyer's market, and 2024 will all be about cash buyers. They have the competitive advantage. Well, we've been saying that throughout 2023 as well, and there's no doubt about it. If you've got the cash, this is the time to invest, isn't it, Joe?
Well, I mean, when you look at that, the market keeps indicating a reversal in values. Let's say from 2019, 2020, 21, we saw an increase in the values. Now we're seeing that there's a correction by maybe 5 or 6%. This is a great time for people to invest and buy, but cash is king, and we're the cash people that will actually do the best they can in order to keep the market right. So yes, we'd like to see the mortgage rate come down, but I think it's a bit of a dream at this moment in time.
So the possibility of a general election looms large in 2024. In your view, without being necessarily too political, do you think a red flavour will give you a better, will be better for the property market, should I say, or a blue flavour?
The thing is that it's like anything, isn't it? They say a new broom always sweeps clean. So some change may be the right change to happen. However, though the Blues have been in there for 13 years, they probably now got the foundations of turning it around quicker for the property market than they do as the Reds. The Blues have always been more supportive of the property market, whereas the Reds are probably not as supportive, though the Reds will come in and have mooted that they will, develop and spend more money and put more money into the property market. But where will they put that? We don't know. Being into social housing, being into government property, or whether they will support the private guy. Whatever happens, whichever one it is, both of them need investment and confidence in the private person. The person that, whether it's a small investor who's going to buy to rent 2 or 3 properties, or the big corporations, but they need the small guy to continue to support that. And it's the question of who does that. Neither of them, in my opinion, at this moment in time, have got the edge over the other. There's not a great deal of difference. I know the polls, start to say that this is better and that's better, but on the day, at the moment, on the time, things can change dramatically. And yes, they both got to do something to the market, but I don't think either of them have got the edge at the moment.
Yeah, they're suggesting that they want to kind of step into the Conservative shoes somewhat, Labour, by saying that they're going to increase the housing delivery, and most of that will be at the affordable end. So where that will leave the private rented sector, who knows? But also on the horizon, of course, is the renters' reform bill, which, if the Reds get in, then that may not even happen after all this. But it's certainly on the statute. It's being planned to be put on the statute books, and there's still a lot of unknowns about how these courts are going to work for people to, when they haven't got any Section 21 anymore, they're going to be wondering how they're going to be able to access their properties, aren't they, landlords?
Well, landlords don't want the renters reform because they are going to get stuck with tenants in properties. And right now, it's probably wise that this renters reform doesn't go ahead, even though they're pressing for it to go ahead. Because, if the government doesn't make the right choices of getting people to invest more into buy-to-let properties, then the current landlords, those that cannot afford to keep the tenants in there, want the tenants to vacate so they can sell their property or get out of the rental market. As long as they have them in there, it's going to become an impossible task. So there are so many challenges, and I hear of them all the time throughout our business. Not only that, those that come to us for the purpose of auctioning a property and looking to achieve the level of money that they want with a tenant in it are struggling to find that somebody would want to buy that because it doesn't create a good investment. So if someone is renting a property for £1,000 a month, and the return that they're getting is, for example, the investment, the buy-to-let mortgage is 7.5%. A couple of percent in the return doesn't do it, because by the time they've actually netted it out, they'll be hardly washing their face with the amount of borrowing that they've had to do. So it's becoming really challenging for landlords at this moment in time to try and sell their properties with the tenants in it. So they want the tenants out. And some of them are genuine. Some of them just, they can't afford it. They've got a mortgage on it and it just can't happen. But if the renters reform comes in and they've got to go through this whole scenario of getting a tenant out, then, the next thing that will happen really is keys will get thrown in, because those landlords will just turn around and say, well, you're not letting them vacate. You're not giving me the court order to get them out. So I'll let the bank take it. And then the bank has to throw those people out. So one way or another, they will get there. It's just, it'll be sad that it'll go through all those hoops to get to that stage. So right now, I think the Section 21 needs to stay. They need to give the confidence to the landlords that we're going to do things for you in the marketplace, and hopefully, rejuvenate their interest and continue to invest.
Our final story of the week is a piece by Richard Rawlings, which is quite interesting. Should estate agents help the market to fall? And I just thought there was some interesting discussion points in this. If you look at the training of estate agents over the years, they're always taught, of course, all about price, get the best possible price, not least because obviously the person who owns the property is going to get the best return on their property investment, but also their fee will be higher the more they sell it for. So it's obvious that it's all about price. And when you think about the way that agents market properties, they stage homes for people, they take those fantastic photographs and try and do everything they can to sort of make the property look its best to get the biggest amount of money in return. And of course, what's being suggested here by Richard Rawlings is that as a result of fairly average properties being put on for high prices, and because over the last few years we've had a very favourable market, to their utter astonishment, those very average properties have sold at these inflated prices. And of course, that in many ways is responsible for the price inflation that we've had. And unwittingly, the agents were correct in pricing the house that high, and they got their money and of course became bullish, and the whole thing started to repeat itself over and over again. It's an interesting thought, isn't it? Maybe the way that we market properties is actually part of the problem.
Yes. Look, being in the agency world, I've always felt that agents and tend to sort of value and want to get the instruction. They will value high in order to win that business. Sellers would like them to value high on the basis that obviously they want the best possible price. So if you are a seller and you invite 3 or 4 agents into your property to give you a market appraisal, to give you their guidance of what they believe they can get for your property or what the market will actually get for it, then you're always going to have a few that will come in and say, well, let's say one says it's 340,000, the other one will say, well, actually, I can get it for 345, and there'll be one who will come and say, nah, they're totally talking rubbish. We can get 360,000 for it. So of course, as a seller, you're tempted to say, well, okay, if he thinks we can get 360, there's no harm. And so the seller then says, well, actually, why don't you put it on at 369, 950? Let's add another 10 on top of that. And so, that sets the new barrier for that particular market. The problem is that those agents, once they've taken it on, are not very good at managing that. So it's great joy when somebody says, I've got the instruction, they come back to the office, we got that on, we knocked out 4 other agents, we're the best, blah, 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 it goes on. And then we come to the reality. The reality is that if you got it right, I always say that if you got the price right, within the first 10 days, you're going to find a buyer. And after that, it's just a hope and a prayer. But what happens is they've got it, they've locked somebody into it. And so now everybody else in that street starts to say, well, if they've got it on for 369, mine must be worth 375. And hence the prices continue to go out. What they're not good at doing, and what Rawlings is saying, is they're not good at managing those by saying, actually, this is what the market does, this is what we felt it was doing, this is what kind of offers we're getting, and we think that you need to consider a figure that may be not at 369, 950, but closer to what I said, which we might be 355 or 357 or 360 or whatever that might be, and actually bring in some sort of reality. They just can't do it because they don't want to go backwards. And that's where he says maybe agents can actually drop the prices down and reverse it. Well, they can only on the basis if the vendors are taught that way. And vendors are not taught that way. They're not shown that reduction, and they're not shown that method. And so they stick on the market and they stay on the market until such times as somebody else goes in. And then another competitor goes in and says to them, well, actually, that was too much money. I don't know why you gave it to them. They drop it by the £10,000, and the next thing you know, you might have a sale on it. It's always been the same. And I often find, and I find it now more so than I probably have done in years, that, when you get somebody else like an auctioneer to come in and give a reality check, most people are actually quite open to a reality check. They accept that. But the problem is the agent that they instructed is kind of hiding behind the fact that he said he would do it and now he can't. So he doesn't want to take the call. And so the property stays on the market forever, and then it gets stale because it's not sold at the price.
They're suggesting now that as a result of all of this, that most homeowners regard their property as much as an investment as they do as a home. And they've also found from new research from Quick Move done in November of this year that most homeowners believe their property is worth 15% more than the valuation given by a responsible estate agent. So that's an interesting statistic. So they're expecting it to be 15% more than a sensible valuation. Yes,
because the expectation has been put in there time and time again. I always say that the real umpire in our game of cricket, for what it's worth, in terms of the agency, is the valuer, is the valuer who comes in and says to the lender that they believe that it's worth X. So let's say you've had it on at £369,000. The valuer comes in and says it's only worth 355. Then as far as the market is concerned, that's what it's worth. That's what the bank's going to lend on. And that's where it is, in some ways, in a bizarre way, it's almost worth saying, well, let's get the valuer in first and see what they're going to say, because that's what it is. But that's not true either, because each valuer that comes in has a different opinion on their comparables as to what they find, as to what they feel that it might be worth. So it's just a motion that you've got to go through until such times as you find it. But there is, when I go back in history, there was a time when you could almost, lick your finger and stick it in the air and think, oh, well, it's worth X. It's not the case now. There's so much data available of what has sold and what hasn't. Even the private owners can actually access that data. It's not secret data anymore. And you would know realistically that you are absolutely, talking rubbish when you come up with this astronomical figure, knowing full well that, everyone else is going to compare it to the figure that actually has been achieved. Now, there's always a margin of error. One could say there's a 5 or 10% margin of error either way, but it's not going to be at the levels that sometimes the people's expectations are. The 15, 20% above the marketplace is not where it's going to be.
I hadn't thought about this actually, but Rawlings makes a very good point. Is if you exclude investors and developers where their focus is profit, most regular sellers, their primary objective is need, not money. And so they're talking about, for example, if you're suddenly got a baby on the way, you're going to need more space, for example. If you're a career climber, you need to move house for a new job in another area, for example. So for these people, or a person in debt, for example, they need to move home before it's repossessed. Those are kind of situations where it's all about need. And then secondly, not even money then, but timing, because they've got to get out at a certain time. So the money is never really, for a genuine seller, excluding investors and developers, the genuine person moving house is because they have a need. And they need that, and that has to be done within a certain time frame. The money surely allows that to happen, but the money is not normally the motivator, and yet the agent focuses constantly on the price.
Yes. So going back in the 80s, when one was looking to sell a house or sell a house on behalf of a client or introduce it, we were always looking at the reasons for their sale. So, the reason was always based on the questions that one was asking. So let's say we could say to them, well, what is the reason for your move? And they might say, well, actually, I'm moving because of my job. I'm relocating. So we know that is a reason for it. When do you want to move by? Well, I've got to move by a certain time because I'm going to, so those are all of the scenarios that existed. So we always sold houses for the reason. It was a big social move back then. When the buy-to-let came into the marketplace, that changed the game. It was the buy-to-let that changed the game for ordinary folk, because they then started saying to themselves, well, actually, I need to move because of those things. But there's another aspect, and that is I'm buying this property to rent, and now I'm thinking about investment. I'm thinking about my return. I'm thinking about, am I going to get more money if I sell this with the tenant? Am I going to get more money if I do it up and do it? So this whole new option of buy-to-let, when that came in, that then changed the reasons why, and that's when agents started to focus perhaps more on the monetary side, thinking, well, actually investors and people, I want to know that they're getting a return on their investment, and we need to share with them, look, XYZ sold for this much money, and if you buy it now at this price, if you spend £20,000 on it, in the next 2-3 years time, you're going to get the 20,000 plus another 20,000 back. Where are you going to get that return? So the game changed in terms of what it is. But reality-wise, house moving, or home hunting was based on needs and their circumstances.
Final point from Rawlings, he suggests that if we help the market to soften somewhat and help people move, more people will move, agents will get paid quicker, and there'll be more money in the pot for everybody. It's an interesting point.
Well, I think that I would love to, have Rawlins come in and talk to some of the agents that we try and talk to as auctioneers, and educate them through that vehicle by saying that, they could. And a lot of agents struggle with properties that they've taken on the market. They don't actually get any interest on it and are shy in perhaps, engaging with auctioneers so that they can actually work with them and collectively still achieve the goal. And what we have to do is we have to get a reality check with the clients, and we just tell them that basically, if it's not going to be X, Y, Z achieved, then it's better that you keep it and stay, because you don't want to be spending your time, energy, and money on something that actually we know is not going to sell.
That's it for this week. Time has beaten us. Next week, we've got a questions week where we're going to answer questions from viewers, or listeners, of course. If you'd like to send them in, it's hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. Looking forward to that next week on Property Matters.